Hello, I'm Richard McPherson. I'm the Chief Instructor at Let's Ride Motorcycle Training, and in this lesson I'm going to show you how to use the brakes. Okay, so let's talk about brakes. Now, our motorcycles have got two brakes. We have a front brake and we have a rear brake. And they're controlled by levers. Now the front brake, the lever for that is on your right handlebar. So this is your front brake lever. The back brake is down by your right foot. So you push this pedal down with your right foot. Now if you're on a scooter, the rear brake is the left lever on your handlebar. So on the manual transmission, this is a clutch, but on the scooters, the automatics, the lever on the left handlebar is your back brake, exactly the same as a push bike. So which is the best brake? Well, it's easy to see which one it is by simply looking at them. So the front brake, you can see, is a disc brake. These are very efficient. They're all hydraulically operated. So you've got a disc at the front there, and attached to that is this caliper, and that's got a piston inside which pushes the brake pads against the disc, and it's all hydraulically operated. Little reservoir at the top here with hydraulic fluid, and that's all activated with the lever here. So very efficient brake, very, very powerful brake. So on the 125 we've got a disc brake, and on the back we have a drum brake. Now drum brakes are sort of archaic technology, dating back to the Ark, these things. But they're fine for these little machines. Basically you have the brake pads, two sort of crescent-shaped pads inside the hub of the wheel, and when you push this down, it's all mechanically operated rather than hydraulic. When you push that down, then you push those two pads out against the inside of the hub of the wheel, and that slows it down. So what you'll find certainly with the lighter machines, that they have discs on the front and drums on the back. That being said, a lot of the new bikes now are disc brakes all round. But you'll find with the lighter machines, quite often you'll find the old-fashioned drum brakes on the back. So why is that? Why is the more powerful brake on the front and not the back? Why not just have powerful brakes on the front and the back? I mean, if you have a chance to have a look around some other motorcycles, particularly the larger machines, you'll see that the front brake has enormous discs on the front. And the calipers have two pistons inside them rather than just the one, on both sides of the wheel as well. And the back brake tends to be a disc brake, but a lot smaller. It tends to be the same size as the 125 brakes here. So the front brake is always the more powerful of the two brakes. So why is that? Why do the manufacturers of these bikes put the best brake on the front and not bother with decent brakes on the back? Well, just think about the weight distribution. I mean, when the bike is sat still like this, the weight distribution is roughly sort of 50-50 between the front and the back wheel. And when you accelerate, what do you think happens to that weight distribution? To accelerate, you'll find that actually it shifts backwards. So the back of the bike will squat, more weight goes onto the tyre on the back there, it gets grip and you can accelerate. So when you shut the power off or you start braking, what happens to the weight now? Well, it's shifting forwards now. So what will happen is that front suspension will compress and that front tire gets pushed into the road and it gets loads and loads of traction. But conversely, all the weight is coming off that back wheel now, isn't it? Not to mention we're dragging it. So the back tire can get very little traction, particularly when we're braking really hard like we're in an emergency stop. So there's no point having powerful brakes on the back of a motorcycle, because if you had super powerful brakes on the back, the moment you touch the thing, it would just lock up, which is useless. But the back brake does have its uses, which we'll come to in just a second. So yeah, the front brake is your number one stopping brake. This is the most powerful for a good reason. It has huge amounts of traction, providing the bike is upright, okay, in a straight line. Because what's happening is when you brake, the weight transfers forward, that suspension compresses, so this suspension here compresses, that tyre then gets splayed out into the road, it gets loads of grip now, and that's where you can bring on the real power. So that's the trick with front brake. You don't want to be grabbing it. If you smack it on as hard as you can, what you're doing is you're clamping that wheel before there's any weight on top of it. So that doesn't give the tyre much chance to get decent grip, and that's where it can lock up. And quite often this can happen in an emergency situation, because in an emergency you're braying freaks out, and your instinct is to smack that front brake on as hard as you can. Now, if it's a dry day, like it is today, and providing the bike is upright, you might get away with that. But if it's wet, then the chances are you won't. It's just going to lock the wheel. So what do you do if you lock up a wheel? Well, the only thing you can do is release that brake as quickly as you can. So if you feel it tucking, and you've got to be super quick here, if you feel it tucking, you just release it and then bring it back on again. A bit like ABS in a car, or ABS on some bikes as well. You've got to get that wheel turning again before you apply the pressure. So the trick with the front brake is not to snatch it on, you've got to squeeze it. So you start off gently, just get that weight transferring forwards, get that suspension compressing, get the tyre squashed into the road, and then you can bring on the real power there. Okay, so that's the trick with the front brake, it's a squeeze, never a grab, it's a squeeze. The back brake, you just gently put pressure on it to bring on the power. But it doesn't stop you nearly as quickly as this one. So this is your main stopping brake, this is your primary brake. And this is sort of a backup to it. But they both have their uses, they both have their pros and cons. So let's talk about the pros and cons of the front brake. So you could probably guess what the pros are. Enormous stopping power. If you need to scrub off speed quickly, this is the brake to use. Incredibly powerful. Now, a lot of people are quite scared of using the front brake. It goes back to push bike days. We've all done it, haven't we? We smack the front brake on, whoops, over the handlebars, face plant. I can still feel it to this day. That's not going to happen on a motorcycle. The reason you flip a push bike is because you are the centre of gravity. So you hit the front brake and you pivot over the handlebars, over you go. With a motorcycle, though, it's different. The centre of gravity is pretty much the engine. And trying to rotate that mass all the way over the handlebars here, it's extremely difficult on a road machine like this one. It does depend on the height of the machine. So like your motocross bikes, actually it's surprisingly easy to go over the handlebars if you know what you're doing. It's not something we teach on a CBT though. So yeah, going over the handlebars is not going to happen. What is more likely to happen with excessive use of the front brake is a wheel lock and it tucks and you go down. So just remember, if that wheel does lock, you've got to let go of that brake as quickly as you can. So pros are enormous stopping power. So this is your primary speed reduction mechanism, your front brake. Cons are, if it does lock, you're in big trouble. You can lose control of the bike very, very quickly. So you must remember to release that brake as soon as you can if you feel that front sliding. It won't slide as long as you come on progressively. So whilst most of the time this is your best friend, it can be your worst enemy. We've already talked about locking up in the wet. But the other scenario is in corners. Now, if we're upright in a straight line, when we apply the brake, the weight is pushing the tyre down into the concrete, exactly what we want. If we're banked over, now when we brake, there's weight pushing down and out. It's like a horrible shearing effect. And if you lose just a little bit of traction on that front, it can go. Whoosh, down you go. So using the front brake in the corner is a big no-no. I mean, it can be done. You'd be surprised what you can get away with, but certainly way beyond what a CBT can teach you. So as a new rider, as a novice rider, get into your head that the front brake is a straight line only brake, and that can save you a lot of headaches. So when I say straight line only, I mean straight line only. So if you're coming up to a corner, you've got to do all the slowing down and the gear shifting for that matter, whilst the bike is in a straight line as you're approaching the bend. All the braking and gear shifting should be completed before you enter that corner, because once you've gone into the corner, all you want to concentrate on is leaning over and getting onto a little bit of power. What you don't want to be doing is hitting that brake mid-corner if at all possible. The best rule here is, if you're not sure how sharp a corner is going to be, slow down too much, because if you do slow down a bit too much, you can always speed up, can't you? If you go into a corner too fast, then that's when unpleasant things happen, your brain freaks out a bit, and your instinct is to smack that front brake on, and nasty things can happen. So always slow down in a straight line. Okay, so if we move to the back brake, so we know this isn't as powerful as the front, for good reason. So where do we use it? Well, because it's such a gentle brake, it's great for the slow stuff. So particularly in the car park work on the CBT, most of the exercises we'll be doing with the rear brake. but we can use it to slow down gently. So if we're approaching, say, some red traffic lights, so we don't need to stop particularly quickly, we could just use a little bit of back brake and bring the bike to a stop. Or if we just need to hold the bike from rolling, let's say on a bit of a hill, just a bit of pressure on the back brake will stop the bike rolling backwards, we can use it there. For the exercises in the car park, the slow riding exercises around all the cones, the back brake's perfect for that kind of thing. But as a stopping brake, it's not very good at all. But when we are stopping quickly, 2 brakes are always better than 1. So although your front is your primary brake, we mustn't forget about the back brake, it's your secondary brake. So we start off with the front brake, but then we use a little bit of back brake as well. So the stopping procedure is always throttle off first, get the power off, a little bit of front brake, a little bit of back brake, and squeeze that front, just increase a little bit of pressure on the foot brake, and then get that clutch in to stop the engine from stalling. Okay, so 2 brakes are always better than 1, but your front is your primary, your rear is your secondary brake. So front, just to recap, extremely powerful, fabulous brake in a straight line, not so good when you're banked over, not so good in the wet either. Back brake is great for your slow riding control or slowing down gently. So I've just quickly touched on riding in the wet. So when we're in wet conditions, we've lost quite a bit of traction on the road. Your front is still your primary brake though, we just can't use it quite as much. You'll be amazed what you can get away with. Modern tyres are absolutely fantastic. The grip levels are astonishing, even in the wet. But it's even more crucial in the wet that you don't grab the brake. So get the tyre loaded first before you bring on the power. Because in the wet, if you do smack it on, the tyre's got no chance at all to get any decent traction. That tread in that tyre needs to displace that water so the rubber can hit the tarmac, and then it's got the grip. So this is why we must squeeze rather than grab. In the wet as well, the back brake, similar to the front, you've lost traction, so it can lock up even easier. So we just need to increase our stopping distances in the wet. In the dry, we'd be looking at a nice 2-second gap between us and the vehicles in front to give us a bit of thinking time if they slam on their brakes and then get onto our brakes. In the wet, we need to increase that, maybe even double it. If it's worse than that, sort of snow and ice, well, leave the bike at home, quite frankly. But if it is really slippery, well, no, I can't even recommend going out in those conditions. So just wet weather and dry weather, stay away from the snow and ice. It is not fun at all. Okay, so that is it for brakes.